Hi everybody, it's Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. A number of my recent broadcasts through social media have dealt with a couple of recurrent themes. One has been media misinformation, misreporting of issues, and another has been the general theme of the housing affordability issue. And tonight I just want to touch briefly on some articles which relate to both those issues, both media misreporting and the housing affordability issue. Usually mainstream media, particularly our metropolitan newspapers, overstate what they call the national housing affordability crisis. They've basically taken a serious situation in Sydney and extrapolated it across the nation to create a national crisis, which I believe doesn't exist. I think housing affordability is far more acceptable in every other part of Australia, including Melbourne, outside of Sydney. So it's rather ironic that in some recent reporting, newspapers have actually understated the situation by, again, misunderstanding the material that's been sent to them in the form of a press release, and because the people writing the articles don't understand their subject matter enough. So we had a press release put out by the Housing Industry Association on their latest Housing Affordability Index. And just to be aware that I would estimate that 80 to 90% of the content of the real estate pages, the reportage of residential property in Australia, is generated by press releases. Somebody sending in a press release, a piece of propaganda, which is rewritten and regurgitated as fact by under-resourced journalists. So the Housing Industry Association put out its latest press release relating to its Housing Affordability Index, in which it said in 6 of our capital cities, outside of Sydney and Melbourne, housing prices are more affordable than has typically been the case in the past 20 years. What they are saying is that the current affordability levels in the 6 capital cities other than Sydney and Melbourne are below the 20-year average rate. So it's better than the 20-year average. This was misinterpreted by a number of journalists working for our major newspapers as being how affordability is the best it's been in 20 years, which is a completely different thing. So we had the Australian, which is an enormously regular source of misinformation about the housing industry, saying in a major article, housing in our cities hasn't been this affordable since 1997, the best it's been in 20 years. Well, that's not what the press release said at all, but that's what the Australian said. Housing affordability is at its highest level in 20 years. Other major media outlets made a similar mistake. It is cheaper to own a house in Brisbane now than it was 20 years ago, according to a peak industry body referring to the Housing Industry Association. But that's not what the HIA said. It didn't say that affordability was at its best levels in 2 decades in most capital cities. It said affordability was actually better than the 20-year average in most of those cities, in the 6 capital cities other than Sydney and Melbourne, and that's primarily due to very low interest rates. What they did say, and this was looking at the situation in the December quarter, recently completed, that in the quarter there'd been a 3% improvement in affordability in Sydney, a 3.5% improvement in Darwin, and smaller improvements in Brisbane and Perth. And overall, affordability not looking too bad because it's better than the average that it's been over 20 years, but certainly not the best it's been in 20 years. Just a slight technical fault there, but basically young writers not understanding the subject matter, misunderstanding what's in the press release, not asking enough questions, not checking things out, not doing the jobs that journalists are supposed to do. So they have just added to the great seething mass of misinformation on the housing affordability issue and all other matters relating to residential property in Australia. That's it for now. Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. Talk to you again soon.